John, great to see you. I hope you had a meaningful and thoughtful Memorial Day.
I did indeed. What a great time to celebrate all the sacrifices that made this country great.
It is amazing how far we've come since the last Memorial Day. I think it was the last one where Kamala wished us a happy long weekend to watching Trump both at West Point and then at Arlington really reflect on where we are as a country in terms of strength and respect worldwide.
Yeah, no doubt. And also things like accountability, too. Just before Memorial Day, Pete Hegseth announcing that we're going to get to the bottom of what really happened in Afghanistan, what really happened at Abbey Gate for the 13 souls lost that day unnecessarily. That will be a great measure of comfort to get to the truth, not the bogus stories that we got from the Biden administration. So I think we headed into this Memorial Day. We're a different country. You see peace through strength again, and a world reacting to the fact that America is back in a leadership position rather than a hunched down globalist sort of backwards leaning country. And so I think 1 year has made an enormous difference. You're right.
One of the things that I was excited about talking to you about is sort of because your background, you led the AP, you led so many key media institutions, and now obviously at Just the News, you kind of continue that investigative legacy that you've had for a while. But when you talk about the investigation that they have in Afghanistan, I kind of was thinking about this as you were just mentioning it, that there wasn't a ton of media attention, was there? It wasn't like people were saying, the finally getting to the bottom of this, what happened. It was almost like, oh boy, like we're not going to bring it up. And when you think about that with your background at all of these big legacy media institutions, is it because they don't want us to know? Because it's not, is there a broader reason, or is it just like laziness?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I think laziness is some of it. Inexperience. The media has gotten much younger, and as a result, people don't have the reporting chops to go and challenge official narratives until it takes time to become a skilled reporter. And then I think the third part is there are preferred narratives in the media today, and I think that is a really, of all the consequences in the media today, the preferred narrative is exactly that. Joe Biden was fine until he wasn't. Hunter Biden's laptop was disinformation until it wasn't. Russia collusion was real until it wasn't. These narratives that are sort of set because they meet the political and ideological wishes of a large number of the media have created probably the largest period of time where the news media has been chronically wrong in American history. You'd have to go back to the yellow journalism era to find a worse period of inaccurate, reversed reporting that literally gets reversed years later. And I think a big part of that is that today, too many reporters insert their ideological wishes in place of a neutral sort of presentation of the facts. They don't trust the American people to make up their mind, so they try to lead them by the nose. And I think that has destroyed the fabric of credibility that the news media gathered over the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s when pretty legitimate reporting occurred.
You, like I said, you're in a very unique position for us to have this discussion because you led the AP in Washington. And I think about it now where they got pushed out of the rotation of the White House pool. Yeah. But you are now leading Just the News, which is in the rotation. So how do you kind of, it's weird. Can you look at that situation objectively right now and say, hey, if I was at the AP, this is how I'd look at this? Because these new changes are benefiting not just the news, but a lot of new organizations that are trying to break in that have been in previous times locked out of the discussion. How do you, as somebody who can look at this from your perch, look at how the White House has changed the landscape of how outlets are covering the White House?
Yeah, listen, I think it's a sea change, and it's one that will benefit American media long term. Whenever we've had a crisis in our marketplace, whether it's the marketplace of ideas or the commercial marketplace, our founding fathers intended us to use competition to be the greatest solution. And for most of the Biden years, there was this ecosystem of new competitors coming in, and they were suppressed. Their advertising was suppressed. Their speech was suppressed. Their social reach was suppressed because Joe Biden and his supporters didn't want the truth to come out. Donald Trump has unleashed that suppression. He has basically overcome it and allowed each of us to just get in and do reporting. And I think it will help fix the profession long term. The counterbalances of having a competitive media rather than a singular drone-like media is going to be beneficial to the American public. And I think Donald Trump and the entire press team at the White House, Carolyn's done a great job. They're allowing us to compete in the marketplace of ideas. And I think the American people are the ultimate winner. And you see things already. You see false narratives get stamped out quicker because of the standing the media has. You see better questions being asked in the press room because there are more competitors in that press room. I think at the end of the day, while outlets like mine benefit, I think the ultimate beneficiary is going to be the American public.
I agree. I think the competition is the key thing here because they can't get away with it. Speaking of which, last night there was this smack, push, whatever you want to call it. Brigitte Macron pushing her husband. Yep. They're playing it off as a playful, like, love tap that's how they apparently express their endearment towards each other.
How about that?
And so maybe I'm just too cynical. But I was thinking about this last night, and I know everybody is making jokes about it, and to some degree, I can get it. But I also, and maybe it's just because I am so cynical about how this stuff is covered. And I said to myself, there is a serious nature of this. Like we've seen women talk about domestic violence and issues of importance that have gone unreported. And I thought to myself last night, if the roles were reversed, if Emmanuel Macron has pushed his wife in the face as they were getting off this plane, there would be worldwide condemnation and outrage. And I thought to myself, okay, I get some of the jokes. I'm glad that I stayed on Mrs. Macron's good side, I guess, is probably the other thing. But I did think to myself, there is a serious part of the story that isn't being reported.
Yeah, listen, I think you're right. I think that the media has a hard time reversing the roles. If a suspect treats a cop really badly, they have a hard time covering that. If a woman beats a man, they have a hard time covering that because they're not the preferred narratives. They're not the comfortable sort of mantras that the media has gotten into. But what happened on that plane deserves to be scrutinized. And again, it could be something playful. It could be something, a sign of stress in the marriage. Again, presidents and prime ministers are humans too, and we all go through relationships and the ups and downs of them. But I think the early coverage has been to try to dismiss it rather than to get to the bottom of what really happened. And, in France, there's lots of opportunity to ask the security service, what did they witness? What really went on? Who's telling the truth? That process hasn't begun yet. Our reporter in France today is asking those questions of the security service today. Yeah, we need to.
I agree. And the thing that was interesting is look, every couple has their little playful moments. I guess what stood out to me was he didn't look like his face wasn't like, ha, 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 I get it, honey, you're pushing me. Like that looked like he was definitely taken back. And so
you look at how they exit the plane too, it does look like a frosty moment. And again, those things happen. And, politicians are people too. And maybe there's something going on in the relationship. We don't know. But I think getting to the truth of it is most important.
Right. All right. Well, continuing down this media thread that we're on, I sort of have been intrigued by the coverage now. All of these folks in the media being like, oh, yeah, mea culpa about, you mentioned some of the previous sins. But how this Biden downfall has continued. And the Wall Street Journal is out with this major story now about how major donors are reluctant to give money to his presidential library. But it was interesting on two fronts that I thought that I wanted to get your take on. One is some people believe, like, this is the line, just so that I'm not accused of taking this out of context. Some people don't want to give money to his presidential library because allies privately worry it will not open during his lifetime. That's number one.
Yeah.
Number two, it talks about Biden faces pressure that other past presidents didn't. He aims to quickly amass an inheritance for his grandchildren, according to people familiar. So that, wait a second, there's two things going on here that I think are fascinating. One is, like, this guy, we talked about Biden Inc. This is something that John Solomon and Just the News have been at the forefront forever. And now they're publicly saying, yeah, we were trying to amass a fortune so that no one in Biden world ever had to work again. That's one narrative. And number two is, if you're openly concerned that the guy's going to die before the library opens, then clearly there was a little bit more to the health issue.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Listen, it's ironic to look at Jake Tapper's book, which is sort of the media's effort to move the narrative back to 2024. Okay, he shouldn't have run in 2024. That's where we've gone from he was perfectly okay to it was a sin to try to run him in 2024. But if you go through Jake Tapper's book, like our great Jerry Dunleavy did this morning, you actually find the proof of a much larger, earlier original sin. In 2020, in 2017, there were already signs of his declining mental faculties. By 2020, according to the information in the book, there was a need to use a teleprompter for interviews. Now, I don't use a teleprompter for interviews. You don't use a teleprompter for interviews. Donald Trump doesn't use a teleprompter for interviews. There was something wrong with Joe Biden. And the fact of the matter is, even in the book that claims to uncover the cover-up, there's another cover-up, which is really by calling 2024 the sin, you're ignoring the fact that the signs of mental decline were much, much earlier, whether it's the Easter Bunny incident on the lawn of the White House during the egg roll, or the need for teleprompter during the 2020 media interviews. The media were covering this up for 4 or 5 years, and their effort to move it back to an acceptable 1 year back isn't the truth. The truth is that Joe Biden was mentally diminished for several years. And I think the way the media is covering it now is they're sort of limited hangout. And in fact of the matter is, the real truth is that Joe Biden was sick probably for several years, probably 4 or 5 years.
You know, the funny thing about this is that when asked about it, Jake Tapper will say, well, I wish some of those 200 people that we've interviewed came forward before that. And my answer to him is, okay, let's just play the odds, John Solomon. If you interviewed 200 people starting the day after the election, and they suddenly all want to talk and tell you all of these things. Yeah. Just play the odds for a second. 200 people told you how bad everything was the day after the election. Do you think maybe 10%, 20 of them would have told you if you had asked before the election? Yes. Because it seems to me that this is a pretty lame excuse. Like suddenly everybody came forward afterwards and have all of these stories, to your point about the teleprompter, and we saw it with our own eyes, not just that moment with the Easter Bunny, where the White House Easter Bunny's guiding him around, but also you remember the dead congresswoman that he's calling out in an event, asking where she was. That didn't take a lot of questions. That was simply, how do you go to an event to honor someone who died and ask where they were without going, God, that's a little odd. So I just find the media excuse from all this. And the bigger question to me is, does anybody pay the price for this? Because some people are pointing the finger at the Biden aides and saying, oh, they covered it up. And then obviously I think that the media is equally culpable for ignoring it because it was so blatant.
Yeah. Listen, I think there is inherent in Jake Tapper's explanation a really alarming admission, which is that today's journalists are handout journalists. They wait for the handout to come, and that's how preferred narratives get sustained by those who are the spin meisters inside of administration. Curious reporters don't wait for the handout to come. They don't wait for people to come forward. They go get the information. They go find out, hey, if the FBI is in possession of Hunter Biden's laptop, is it really Russian disinformation? And I was able to get that answered in 2020. It took the rest of the media until 2022 and 2023 to come to that recognition. Curious reporters go out and they say, hey, there's something odd about the notion that the president of the United States, who's getting security briefings, was considered to be a Russian stooge. That just doesn't seem possible. They would have cut him off before this. And you go back and you find out there was no truth to that. I think it's a lack of curiosity, and it's that mentality of handout journalism that has created the ability for people like the Biden administration to keep preferred narratives sustained. There's a lack of curiosity and a lack of neutrality that has kept the media from really doing its job. Be more curious, be more assertive. I always start with the answer that maybe what you're telling me isn't true. When Condi Rice stood up a couple days after 9/11 and said, no one envisioned flying a plane into a building, I said, that's not possible. And of course, I was able to find out that going all the way back to 1993, Al-Qaeda was talking about flying planes into buildings. And that led me down a path of unraveling a lot of the failures of the 9/11 era. You have to be curious. And today's reporters are more interested in keeping the status quo, getting to their book parties, than being curious enough to challenge official narratives.
I love the phrase handout journalism because I was thinking to myself, in all my time. That's
what
so
it is.
true. It is, though. I'd call a reporter and be like, hey,
Yeah.
I got this story. Let me put a little pretty bow on it and hand it to you.
Yep.
But it's the same
Yeah.
thing. I think back to COVID, John, where it was like,
Yep.
so let me get this straight. There's a lab that produces viruses, or
Yes.
or it could be a bat.
Yes.
And
It's almost
like,
laughable, isn't it? Yeah.
but you're like,
Yeah.
hey, they told me it was a bat, so got to go with that. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.